Open our program today, I'd like to call upon the Executive Director of the Uyghur Human Rights Project, Umar Kanat, who also serves as the elected chairman of the World Uyghur Congress Executive Committee. Umar, please welcome our Executive Director.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone on behalf of Uyghur Human Rights Project, the Uyghur American Association, and the World Uyghur Congress. Uyghurs around the world are calling for real action. We are marking the second anniversary of finding of genocide and crimes against humanity by the Uyghur Tribunal announced in London on December 9, 2001. This day was chosen as the anniversary of the adoption of the Genocide Convention by the member state of the United Nations, which was the first international convention passed by the United Nations. It was just 3 years after the end of Second World War, in a direct response to the horrors of the Nazi regime's genocide of the Jewish people. It's extremely significant to mark this day on Capitol Hill. We are especially grateful to Dr. Neil Dunn, Congresswoman Young Kim, for being part of the program today. We are grateful for the leadership of Congressman Mike Gallagher and Raja Krishnamurti and the entire Select Committee on the CCP, and Senator Merkley and Congressman Smith of the CCC. The U.S. Congress has created a gold standard for responding to the genocide, with legislation that is being only now considered in other countries. 2 laws have already passed by an overwhelming bipartisan vote. 2 laws have already passed by the overwhelming bipartisan vote: the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act of 2020 and the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act of 2021. Right now in the Congress, there are many more pending bills for accountability, for prevention of business complicity with atrocities in our homeland, East Turkestan. We are particularly grateful for the introduction of the bipartisan Uyghur Policy Act, the Uyghur Genocide Accountability Sanctions Act, the No Dollars for Uyghurs Forced Labor Act, and the Transnational Policy Act of 2023. We also want to notice the addition of 2 more perpetrators to the U.S. Global Magnitsky Sanctions list last Friday. This is an important message that the Biden administration is taking concrete actions for accountability for the genocide. These additions mean that now 14 Xinjiang and Beijing officials are sanctioned. Many more are needed. The official United Nations Genocide Commemoration Day on December 9 is formally known as the UN International Day of Commemoration of Dignity of the Victims of Crimes of Genocide and the Prevention of this crime. By holding this event, we want to highlight the importance of commemorating the victims of the Uyghur genocide and honoring the survivors. But we must act without delay on real action for accountability, deterrence, and a practical humanitarian response for the victims and survivors. Thank you all for your tremendous contribution in research and for policy action to end the nightmare of the Uyghur people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Umar. We'll be turning to our speakers in the room in a moment, but first we have a greeting from the President of the World Uyghur Congress, Dolkan Isa, which will be played on the screen if all goes well.
Good afternoon. Welcome to all on behalf of the World Uyghur Congress. December 9 is the year's was 75 years anniversary of the Genocide Conventions. It is highly significant that December 9 was also the day that the Uyghur Tribunal issues its final judgment in London in 2021. The Tribunal finding of genocide was the first atrocity crime finding issued by an international body that followed the format international tribunal such as international commissions of inquiry. Since then, December 9 has been the day when the World Uyghur Congress and Uyghur around the world commemorate Uyghur Genocide Recognition Day. On the final day of the hearing in 2021, Consul to the Uyghur Tribunal, Mr. Hamid Sabi explained that the tribunal had more than 30 researchers who spent over the 10,000 hours compiling materials apart from submission of the hundreds of witnesses. Mr. Sabi noted that despite the considerable work of the tribunal over many months, what has been presented to you is not even the tip of the iceberg. It is now the responsibility of the state and international institution to apply to tribunal judgment. I'm very grateful to Uyghur Human Rights Project and Uyghur American Association for co-organizing this important event in the US Capitol. I would like to thank all participants and especially members of Congress who are speaking out on this occasion. The World Uyghur Congress once again requires the member state of the United Nations to implement Article 8 of the Genocide Convention to support the establishment of an independent UN mechanism to investigate and document this violation. I ask the US be a leader in the making sure that the Genocide Convention is acted on. Uyghurs are counting on the democratic country to make sure that never again has real meaning. Thank you.
Global criminal justice, position that everyone who's followed her work was so pleased that she was taken up at the beginning of the current administration. Quite a voice for dignity and for the prevention and punishment of atrocity crimes. Please welcome Ambassador Mansha.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Louisa, and everyone for organizing this event. It's really an honor to be here to commemorate this day with all of you and everyone who's also appearing online. I do need to leave at 5 for another engagement, so apologies for that. I'm sorry I can't stay and enjoy some refreshment with you afterwards, but I am really pleased to be able to be here and just share a few remarks with you in solidarity with the Uyghur community and with others who care about human rights and dignity around the world. We are recognizing today the ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity being committed by the authorities of the People's Republic of China against predominantly Muslim Uyghurs, ethnic Kazakhs, ethnic Kyrgyz, and members of other ethnic and religious groups in Xinjiang. And the goal is to commemorate the dignity of those individuals, but also their legal rights under international law, and to acknowledge and to recognize their survivors. For 75 years, the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide has outlined a vision of a world in which genocide and other mass atrocities are prevented and punished. It's a vision in which all governments are responsible for protecting human lives within their jurisdiction, and when the prevention of genocide fails, to punish those who are most responsible. Also, inextricably and critically linked to prevention and punishment is the importance of countering genocide denial, to push back against those who would obscure the truth, whether it's about the Holocaust, about Srebrenica, about Rwanda, or about Xinjiang. While we know that it is very challenging to create pathways to formal justice for criminal accountability for the atrocities being committed in Xinjiang by the PRC authorities, it does not mean that we sit idly by or remain silent. In January 2021, the United States called these atrocities by name: crimes against humanity and genocide. Ambassador Kelly Currie is here, and you'll hear from her later. She was a part of that effort. Today, the world must stand firm against these atrocities in both word and deed. Careful, comprehensive, robust documentation is what made the U.S. atrocity determination possible. This documentation is overwhelming and it is credible. It is also ongoing. Journalists, academics, independent researchers, and NGOs are working relentlessly to ensure that the repression of over 10 million people will not be ignored or denied in that tightly controlled and heavily surveilled region of Xinjiang. And we're very fortunate to have Adrian Zenz here today to discuss his most recent research. Witnesses are sharing their experiences, notwithstanding the vulnerability and the risks for doing so. Commercial satellite images of detention center and destroyed mosques and Uyghur cemeteries are being analyzed. Supply chains tainted by forced labor are being tracked. Commodities produced through the use of forced labor in Xinjiang are being blocked from reaching legitimate markets. Going forward, all of this documentation will be critical in the face of what we know will be ongoing denials by the PRC regime. The PRC regime seems to have transferred a large number, but untold number, of detainees out of these so-called re-education camps and into more formal detention centers. So we see the evolution of repression, and we need to keep up in terms of our documentation and how we're able to message what's happening. Furthermore, the PRC has extended its brutal policies beyond its borders with transnational repression in various forms against diaspora communities and against human rights defenders abroad. So, as mentioned, today we are here also to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the core ambition of which is to infuse societies around the world with equality, human rights, fundamental freedoms, dignity, and justice. This landmark document, which, it should be noted, emerged from the work of diplomats around the world, East and West, remains a touchstone for human rights and is as important as ever. The United States annually marks this occasion by taking concrete actions to promote accountability for human rights abuses and violations around the world. Our actions last Friday, as Omar mentioned, related to the atrocities and other human rights abuses in Xinjiang include imposing sanctions on 2 PRC government officials for their connection to serious human rights abuses. Number 2, visa restrictions on one of the officials for gross violations of human rights in Xinjiang. Number 3, the addition of 3 entities onto the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act entity list. They are on that list because there are credible allegations that they are working with the Xinjiang government to recruit, transport, transfer, harbor, or receive or benefit from the forced labor of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, or members of other persecuted groups living in Xinjiang. These actions to promote accountability are in addition to the numerous sanctions, visa restrictions, export controls, import restrictions, etc., that the United States has already imposed over the last several years. We've also issued a Xinjiang supply chain business advisory, most recently updated in September, in order to highlight the heightened risk to businesses with supply chains and investments in Xinjiang, given that many entities complicit in forced labor and other human rights abuses are there and throughout the PRC. So, in closing, I would like to share with you that I and my office, the Office of Global Criminal Justice, do not recognize a hierarchy of crimes. The core international crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, cover the range of mass atrocities and are equally serious under international law. They have different criminal elements and are operative within different contexts. Consistent with our obligations under the Genocide Convention and the Geneva Conventions, the United States has enacted domestic laws that enable the prosecution of genocide and war crimes here in our own courts when we're able to exercise jurisdiction over responsible individuals. However, crimes against humanity are not yet criminalized under U.S. law. That said, there are many individual crimes under the Federal Penal Code that might be applicable to the situation in Xinjiang, and this includes the federal crimes addressed to murder, sexual violence, human trafficking, forced labor, torture, and war crimes. The Biden administration supports draft legislation now within Congress to make crimes against humanity a separate prosecutable offense under U.S. criminal law. And to that end, we are engaging with members of Congress on this issue. So in closing, I want to thank everyone here who has spoken out so bravely against what they have experienced or what has been experienced by their family members. And we will continue to work with the international community to promote accountability for those responsible for atrocities and human rights violations and abuses wherever they occur, including within the PRC. As Secretary Blinken has said on this day of remembrance, let us recommit to use all the tools at our disposal in a collective effort to prevent and respond to genocide and other atrocities. Let us speak out against denial. Let us seek justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Beneshek. In fact, in this room, we have a survivor of the re-education concentration camps who did speak before the House Foreign Affairs Committee just about 2 years ago, and I hope you'll say hello. Tursimar, would you stand up so we can recognize? Experiences great trauma, as many victims do when they provide their testimony, and we're very grateful. Next, we're very pleased to hear from Dr. Neil Dunn, a member of Congress who has been very clear-eyed on the crimes committed by the government of China, the human rights implications for people in China, the Uyghurs, and the world, and even in the U.S., what it means when we are confronted with ongoing human rights violations and the obligations for our Congress, our administration, and our people to act. Please welcome Dr.
Let me start by saying thank you, Luis, and thank you, Umber, who's sitting right there, for inviting me here, allowing me to speak my mind on the Uyghur Genocide. There are many lives that are tragically lost in this genocide. The Chinese Communist Party is irresponsible agitator of a serious threat to human rights throughout the world and the rule of law throughout the world. Most importantly, to me, they're guilty of hideous human rights violations to many of their very own citizens. The CCP's forced organ harvesting practice is perhaps the single most repugnant practice, and it simply must be stopped. The Uyghur people have dealt with us for far too long. Detainees, typically in their 20s, undergo a health check that includes blood typing and matching to create a catalog for future organ harvesting. Some detainees are forced to wear color-coded bracelets and vests after this health check that makes it easier to find in their work camps when their organs are needed for someone who's favored by the party. Then they simply vanish. They disappear from the camps in the middle of the night, never to be seen alive again. This is a truly horrific crime against humanity. We must work together to stop this genocide and reveal the CCP's true present nature. I'm grateful that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle recognize the importance of stopping this inhumane practice. And I look forward to working with them and many of you here in finding solutions to help these persecuted people. I can't thank you enough for recognizing us today. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you again, Dr. Dunn. I think now we'll hear from Hamid Sabi, who was counsel for a long process of arranging the Uyghur Tribunal according to international processes, as Dr. Wilson mentioned, following the format of an internationally sanctioned commission of inquiry, although no vote has yet occurred in any human rights body of the UN to initiate such an investigation. This investigation had its final judgment issued exactly 2 years ago. He's in London, so we'll let him speak before it gets too late. And our tech crew will let us.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, UHRP, for organizing this event. And my name is Hamid Sabi, and I was the counsel to the Uyghur Tribunal. The tribunal was set up at the request of World Uyghur Congress and to Sir Geoffrey Nice, asking him to chair a People's Tribunal for this purpose. People's Tribunals are generally done when no other organization or institution takes proper jurisdiction over the issue. So in the absence of any world organization or any international court dealing with the question of genocide in Xinjiang, the Uyghur Tribunal was established and took over this matter. A panel of 9 members was appointed, and I organized a team of researchers and lawyers that worked almost 18 months to produce all the evidence and the documents that the tribunal needed. Our researchers basically went through all the available documents, all the documents that were publicly available and online, and created one of the largest database for the Uyghurs. We submitted to the tribunal evidence of some 50 experts and 50 witnesses, and we had oral hearing, over 8 days of hearings in London of these witnesses and experts. And the tribunal produced a very well-based and reasoned judgment, which has been published and can be obtained from Amazon. And the judgment runs into 350 pages with all the evidence and backup and documents. All the documents are available for public review. The judgment has been reviewed but not been criticized by any law school or any lawyer or anybody of competence. And unfortunately, none of the governments that had been notified had taken action in this respect. The British government, even as we speak, we are asking them to reconsider their position regarding this judgment. It is the obligation of every member state of the Genocide Convention that upon having suspicion that genocide is being committed, to take action and start and prevent. The whole convention was based on the question of prevention. More than 17 parliaments around the world had recognized that atrocities in Xinjiang amounts to genocide, and yet none of the governments had taken the proper action. And the United States government, through Secretary Pompeo and then Secretary Blinken, accepted that genocide has occurred, but no action was taken. It is the obligation of the government, which is a member state of the Genocide Convention under Article 1, to take action to prevent the ongoing genocide. Yet nothing was done. The letters that Council wrote to Secretary Blinken was not answered, although the US Embassy in London confirmed that we will be receiving an answer, but we did not. The basis for which Secretary Blinken announced that genocide had happened has not been published, and the whole world community has failed. Raphael Lemkin spent all his life to promote the concept of genocide. He coined the name of genocide and was the creator and lobbyist that managed to get Genocide Convention approved by the United Nations General Assembly. His motto was never again. The whole purpose of the convention was not to take revenge against those who killed his family, against those who had committed the atrocities of Holocaust. But the whole point was to stop and prevent this happening to other people, to other groups. And unfortunately, this part of Blinken's this part of Lemkin's message has not been followed, and many institutions has failed to act properly and under the responsibility they have. And the atrocities that committed, as was mentioned earlier, is not limited to genocide. Genocide in the concept that generally is known did not happen in the fashion of mass killing of the Uyghurs. But the horrors that have been done to Uyghur people in these camps are unbelievable. The rape, sexual abuse, torture, malnutrition, lack of sanity, and the basic requirements of human beings are missing from these camps. 1.2 million Uyghurs are in the camps. They are denied every basic right of human rights. None of them are therefore committing any crime. None of them have done anything that deserves this punishment. They are all innocent people, and they are being punished for things they haven't done simply because they have a different color or a different religion or different language. Their cultural base had been attacked. All their religious sites had been destroyed. If somebody sends a message on the mobile saying Assalamu alaikum, next day he's in a camp and convicted for a 10-year imprisonment. The world cannot sit silent and allow these things happen. China Tribunal, dealing with the forced organ harvesting in China, concluded that PRC, People's Republic of China, is a criminal state and warned all those who are interacting with this state to be aware that they're dealing with a criminal state. The same was confirmed by Uyghur Tribunal. It is improper to deal with a state that commits these crimes and deal with it as a normal, natural, sovereign government. I hope the world would stop allowing these atrocities continue, and the concept of never again would be actually and virtually reacted upon and be accepted and stopped and prevented from committing these crimes again and again. I thank you all for your attention.
And explaining its significance. We're truly, truly grateful for your service. And I believe that this will be a quotable moment from tonight's remark to talk about the government of China as a criminal state. Next, we're very, very pleased to have another member of Congress joining us. Congresswoman Young Kim is really a hero to Uyghur Americans and really to Uyghurs around the world for consistent championing of human rights, fundamental freedoms for people around the world, and certainly for the Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples who are suffering so much today. We so much appreciate her dogged effort to ensure that the Uyghur Policy Act is on the agenda for Congress to consider, and we welcome her today to give her remarks.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here. I want to thank everyone for attending this forum. I represent California's 40th Congressional District, which is in South Orange County. I also serve as chairwoman of the subcommittee on Indo-Pacific of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And I'm honored to be with the Uyghur Human Rights Project, World Uyghur Congress, and the Uyghur American Association today as we mark the Uyghur Genocide Recognition Day over the weekend, and we commit to doing all we can to stop Uyghur genocide and stand with Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities facing unthinkable human rights atrocities by the CCP, especially in Xinjiang area. You know, as many of you know, I too am an immigrant from South Korea. I do have family members who defected North Korea. So holding authoritarian regimes accountable and supporting freedom-loving people around the world are deeply personal to me. As Hamad said, sitting on the sidelines as the CCP commits genocide against Uyghurs means we are complicit. Under the CCP's surveillance, Uyghurs face genocide in modern-day concentration camps. We also know that CCP is committing cultural genocide against Tibetans. We know that Hong Kong for democracy protesters and journalists, they're also being silenced and thrown into jail. But I noticed that this was not mentioned when President Biden recently met with Xi Jinping right here in the United States in San Francisco during the APEC conference. Xi Jinping has shown no interest in working with the United States on human rights issues. Instead, the CCP cracks down on dissidents who draw attention to the genocide, even the dissidents and Uyghurs who are living here in the United States. Ignoring our values and sidestepping human rights is deeply concerning to me. We cannot put our principles aside in talks with other countries. The United States must act. That's why I have once again introduced the Uyghur Policy Act, which is a bipartisan, bicameral effort with more than 100 bipartisan co-sponsors to help the United States to take concrete steps to stand with Uyghurs, such as we're asking the State Department to appoint a special coordinator for Uyghur issues and provide the language instruction at the Foreign Service Institute so we can send Uyghur fluent officers at the Mission China locations. Many of you were there last week when our committee marked up this bill and it passed our House Foreign Affairs Committee unanimously, and I'm really hopeful that this will come to the House floor very soon. I also am leading another bill related to China. PRC is not a developing act. That act attempts to revoke China's developing country status it is using to game the system and exploit countries that are actually in need. So I'm excited to share that this bill not only passed the House unanimously, but it has been included in NDAA. And this way, we are working on passing NDAA. And we need to get that across the finish line. So I want to thank you and your community for working very closely with me and my team to advocate for the passage of these very, very important bills, because your advocacy made a difference in getting those hundreds of co-sponsors of these bills to raise awareness of the genocide that has been committed against Uyghurs, and we're going to need to continue to work together. So I want you to know that I'm here as your advocate, as your strong voice, and I will always be a loud voice in this matter. But today, I'm glad to see that many of you have gathered in Congress. So I hope that we can listen and learn from each of you here today. Your stories, your perspectives, and voices are so important as we continue to shine a light on the CCP's gross human rights abuses. So thank you. Have a great meeting, and we hope one of my team members will stay and take notes, and we'll continue this fight together.
Thank you, Congresswoman Kim. You provide yet more inspiration, and we also appreciate the hard work on a daily basis. Next, we'll hear a representative of yet another part of our congressional effort to bring to light the abuses all throughout China, whether we're talking about Uyghurs or Tibetans, Hong Kongers, Falun Gong practitioners, and all sorts of other people who are suffering under a dictatorial and genocidal regime. So I will let our next speaker explain the greetings that he's bringing, and please join me in welcoming Piro Tosi to the podium.
I'll just be very brief. I do, on behalf of the chairman and co-chairman of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, Chairman Chris Smith and co-chairman Jeff Merkley, send you greetings and well wishes, and thank you so much for convening this very important hearing. Briefly, I think probably the most important piece of legislation to come from Congress over the really past several decades has been the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and it really has had an impact. However, legislation is only as effective as it is, how well it is implemented. And I think while we do greet the fact that we've now named a number of Chinese officials who are complicit in the genocide, and while we certainly welcome that, more needs to be done. We know that there are more people who are complicit in the genocide. More needs to be done with regards to the entity list, and that has yet to be fully realized. So certainly there's more that the administration can do, and we're grateful for the good work that Undersecretary Silvers and folks at DHS are doing, but more needs to be done. We do know so much, Adrian Zen's over here, I mean, so much that we know about what is happening there, as to Elnagar, so many of you really that have done to bring awareness. It's awful what is happening there, but you know what is also awful is when that long arm of repression comes to our shores. And what we saw in San Francisco at the APEC conference should shock all of us. Okay, fortunately, Congress is listening to you. The four corners, again, of the Congressional Executive Commission on China have introduced the Transnational Repression Policy Act of 2023. And I will note that tomorrow, the CECC will be holding a press conference in the Rayburn building at 10 o'clock to focus on that. We'll bring those voices of those who have been repressed in our own country, in San Francisco. And I also note that our colleagues in the Select Committee will also be holding a hearing on that. So together, all of us here in Congress hear your voice. And your voice is very important, and we're here for you. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a great contribution to hear from the staff director of the Congressional Executive Commission on China. Thank you, Pierre. Next, I would like to call to the podium Adrian Zenz, an indefatigable researcher who has done so much to ensure that the voices of Uyghurs, the documentary research and the analysis has come forward in a very important way. He was part of a very important witness for the Uyghur Tribunal as well as a source for journalists and policymakers really around the world. Please welcome Dr. Zenz.
Thank you so much to the Omar Khanat Uyghur Human Rights Project, Uyghur American Association for having me here today. It's so important to remember, to not forget. In the summer of 2019, when I first looked at local government reports to assess the percentage of the Uyghur population put into camps, I realized that these reports contained another statistic, one that I had not looked for: birth rates and death rates. At the time, I was studying mass internment. By looking through these documents from multiple Uyghur regions across several years, I happened to notice more by coincidence that birth rates were declining dramatically. In several cases, natural population growth, birth rate minus death rate, fell to zero or below zero. Today, we recognize that a genocide is taking place among the Uyghur people in Xinjiang. Following the horrors of World War II, the United Nations Genocide Convention was ratified in 1948. However, sadly, the Genocide Convention has never actually prevented a single genocide from taking place. It is rare that an ongoing atrocity is documented in great detail while it is still taking place. Rarely has any ongoing atrocity been as well documented as the one taking place among the Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other ethnic groups in what Uyghurs call East Turkestan, what Beijing refers to as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. When I looked at the declining birth rates, I thought the reason was obvious. There were the mass internments in camps. Many men were in camps. That would mean birth rates were not so much declining because the state wanted them to decline, but because the state was putting Uyghurs into camps and then falling birth rates were a side effect of mass internment. However, my subsequent more focused research showed that this was not the case. The state was not just putting Uyghurs into camps, but the birth rates were declining because of new, unprecedented and draconian policies designed to slash birth rates. The state was targeting Uyghur births. In some regions, up to 1/3 of all women of childbearing age were scheduled to be sterilized in one single year. But why? Genocide requires a determination of intent. What is the intent of the state and the Uyghur region? This intent has been bluntly expressed by several scholar officials from the region. For example, Liu Zhaoyu, Dean of the Institute of Frontier History at Tarim University, spoke at a 2015 academic event to discuss, quote, methods to solve Xinjiang's problems, unquote. Liao said that in southern Xinjiang, the state must, quote, change the population structure and layout and the dominance of the Uyghur ethnic group, unquote. In the 2016 academic publication, Liao argued that the underlying reason for Xinjiang's unrest and terrorism was the high concentration of Uyghur populations. Due to a recent exodus of Han, the imbalance of the ethnic and the Han population, he said, in southern Xinjiang had reached, quote, an unbelievably serious degree. Uyghur populations, the human threat. In 2020, Xinjiang's Deputy Secretary General of the Party Committee of the Production and Construction Corps argued that despite all progress, the root of Xinjiang's social stability problems had not been resolved, and that was in July 2020. That was when millions of Uyghurs were in camps. He said, the problem in southern Xinjiang is mainly the unbalanced population structure. Population proportion and population security are important foundations for long-term peace and stability. The proportion of the Han population in southern Xinjiang is too low, less than 15%. The problem of demographic imbalance is southern Xinjiang's core issue. Despite these demonstrably genocidal intentions, the response of the world has, as we have heard, been inaction. The US government has thankfully recognized that the genocide is taking place. But what does that mean? Just recently, the US for the first time sanctioned a Chinese central government official over the atrocity, Hu Lianhe, who defended the mass internments at the United Nations in 2018. However, the US has not published any plan of action or strategy as to how it plans to fulfill its obligation, its treaty obligation, to prevent genocide from taking place. This therefore remains a crucial gap in the United States' approach to the Uyghur region. Today is an important opportunity to challenge the US and all governments of the world to take decisive steps towards meeting its obligation under the 1948 Convention to prevent the continuation of the genocide among the Uyghurs. Thank you.
Thank you again so much, Adrian. I'd like to turn now to Ambassador Kelly Curry. She has served in several responsible positions in U.S. diplomacy, including at the UN, as well as in the Office of Global Criminal Justice and the Office of Global Women's Affairs, a very good friend to the Tibetans, to the Uyghurs and the Hong Kongers, and all people struggling for their freedom and for democracy across Asia and certainly for China. So we're very happy to have Kelly with us here today. Kelly.
Thank you, Louisa, and thank you, UHRP, for inviting me to speak on this very important and solemn occasion. It's always difficult to follow Adrian on a panel or in speaking, and I've had to do it several times because he comes with such hard-hitting facts and so much of he just brings the empirical knowledge of what it is that we are dealing with right to the fore, and is so articulate about it. And he's someone that we've all of us who've worked on trying to come up with policy responses to this crisis have leaned on very heavily. So thank you, Adrian, for your work. And I also want to thank Ambassador Nanshak. I know she had to leave, but and I'm looking at her staff over there. The work that she has done in the Global Criminal Justice Office before, in her earlier iteration there, as well as the work she did in academia, including work she did on a specific report that really looked at the predicate acts of genocide and crimes against humanity that the CCP was committing, and laid together with the work that Adrian did, in particular the work on population control that Adrian did, the documentation and evidence that he was able to bring forward were instrumental in the genocide determination that the U.S. government made in January of 2021. And I was intimately involved in that effort, along with other people in this room who I don't know if I should name check them or not, but they know who they are, and I want to thank them and express my deep gratitude to them. But most importantly, I think that and I see Tusine here and others who have from the community who really made this happen. And we received an advanced document or an advanced copy of Adrian's report on population control in the spring of 2020, just as the COVID pandemic was raging and the lockdowns were underway. And we got an advanced copy of it. And I remember when I started to read it, my eyes got big, my mouth fell open, and I realized that this was the missing piece. We knew about the mass detentions, we knew about the torture and the abuse, we knew about the kidnapping of children at colonial boarding schools, we knew about the panopticon of high-tech security and the racist and assimilationist policies that all of those things were intended to enforce on the Uyghur people. We knew about the forced labor and how it was transferring across China and getting into supply chains. But what we did not have was this evidence, this piece of evidence that showed that Beijing not only had the intent and the means, but was actually carrying out the destruction of the Uyghur people by attacking the birth rate and attacking the reproductive capabilities and attacking children. And this piece, by this attack on the Uyghur family, this attack on the population, constituted that key element to reduce in whole or in part the population. And when you talk about what it means to commit genocide, that is at the crux of this, the intent and the means to destroy the population in whole or in part. And that evidence, when we saw it in the spring of 2020, was the key piece. That was what made everything else fall into place that we had, and that we had been talking about for several years. And so when we got that, I remember calling a couple of people who are sitting in the front row here and saying, "We've got them. We've got it. This is it. We can go forward." And a person who's sitting in the third row over there too, I remember thinking, "This is it." we can really start to move forward with a genocide determination now. It still took another 6 months after that in order to get there. And that was, again, largely due to many people in this room, especially to the community, to the thousands, hundreds and thousands of Uyghur Americans and others who contacted the State Department and told their stories about their missing relatives and talked about the fact that they had not been able to reach their family members for months or years. The people who publicly testified about losing their family members into the state security system, who publicly testified about their survival of that system. The Congress and the pressure from Congress and the action from Congress, all of these things came together to create the final ingredient, which was the political will to actually make the genocide determination. When you do genocide determinations, when the US government does them, it's not enough to have the facts. It's not enough to have the law. You have to have the political will. And so that was the key also, was to have that political will. And so all of you who helped to create that political will that made that decision possible, I want to thank you for and express my gratitude to you for doing that. I think that we also saw Beijing help to provide space for that political will through its own actions, whether it was the denial of access for people trying to understand the origins of the COVID virus, or other repressive and aggressive actions that Beijing took throughout 2020 that also helped to drive that political will forward. It's never an easy process to get a genocide determination in the United States government, even when you are looking in the rear view. But as Adrian noted, doing one in the middle of the genocide is almost unprecedented. I think that and one of the main arguments that we made was that we shouldn't just wait until the genocide is done to call it what it is. And this was another unprecedented thing about this genocide and crimes against humanity determination that we made, was that it was intended really to be preventative and to stop the genocide. And that was really, I think, a unique aspect of it. So I can't stress enough how important that was, how difficult it was, and how many people were involved in making it happen, and so many people in this room. That relentless advocacy that held all of us to account in the policymaking space was really, at the end of the day, that's what made us fight for you and what pushed us to finish the job on getting that determination. Unfortunately, we are nearly 4 years after that determination. I think all of us are frustrated by the way the United States and others have failed to act in ways that are commensurate with the seriousness of that determination on crimes against humanity and genocide. The PRC authorities are still committing crimes against humanity and genocide. The genocide has not stopped. But many of our leaders have grown silent and are trying to get back to business as usual. Congresswoman Kim talked about some of our political leaders wanting to get back to business as usual. But I'm going to focus on our business leaders who want to get back to business as usual. It's been quite disturbing to watch our business elites return to the very practices that empowered the CCP to think it could get away with committing genocide in the first place. It has been horrifying to watch them send a clear message to the CCP that they don't need to pay any meaningful reputational or financial costs for what they've done to the Uyghur community and to others who have been victims of its abuses. I think that even though you see things like foreign direct investment falling year over year this year, and foreign direct investment into China falling and dropping precipitously, that exit of money into China has more to do with geopolitics than genocide, unfortunately. The U.S. financial services sector in particular has enabled, whitewashed, and financed Beijing's atrocities. They've led lobbying efforts against legislation and executive branch efforts to prevent further atrocities and to promote accountability. From the UFLPA to more recent efforts to limit outbound investment in the CCP's abusive and coercive security apparatus. The financial services industry were the first ones to race back to China and meet with CCP officials in Hong Kong and Beijing and grovel to them to try to reinstate themselves as partners in the Chinese market and protect their access. They filled the room in San Francisco last month, giving Xi Jinping standing ovations and desperately clinging to their morally bankrupt vision of engagement with this genocidal regime. It's time for us all to demand an end to business as usual with the CCP. And we need to start with the financial services sector, because access to Western capital markets and sophisticated financial services has been the lifeblood of Beijing's authoritarian advance and its ability to terrorize its own people. It's time for us to remind US banks and investment firms that they are using our savings, our pension funds to advance their immoral agenda and take the necessary steps to stop them. It's time to put our money where our mouth is. We can't save genocide and crimes against humanity and do nothing. We must start at home and hold our banks and financial services providers to account and hold them to a higher standard. We should tell our own banks, whoever you do your banking with, who has your checking account and your savings account and your credit card companies, that you don't want them to keep doing business in China, and you won't keep doing business with them if they are doing business with China. If their senior leadership goes and pays obeisance to Xi Jinping and other Chinese leaders. You need to tell your investment manager to get your retirement savings out of CCP equities and not to use investment funds that are active in Chinese repression. We need to pass the Uyghur Policy Act, and we need to pass restrictions on outbound investment that are based on not supporting crimes against humanity and genocide. And we need comprehensive enforcement of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, including meaningful sanctions on perpetrators, including Politburo members, SOEs, and the financiers of these atrocities. It's time that our actions be commensurate with our words when we use the words crimes against humanity and genocide. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Kelly, for providing a moving account of the effort to recognize an ongoing genocide and understanding how unusual that is. Very important for Uyghurs to recognize and understand that, and also the agenda going forward. Where is the money? We are nearing the end of our program, but before we have closing remarks from one of our co-sponsors, we will hear from Carl Gershman, the founding president of the National Endowment for Democracy, and my first boss in Washington. Now, I guess my boss again, because he's just joined the board of directors of the Uyghur Human Rights Project. Carl.
Thank you, Louisa, and it's really just wonderful to be together with so many friends for such an important cause. And we meet today on Uyghur Genocide Recognition Day at a time when the word genocide is being loosely thrown around as a term of abuse without any reference whatsoever to its meaning under international law. The context of the current controversy surrounding the word genocide is the war in Gaza that was triggered by the Hamas massacre of over 1,200 Israelis on October 7th, with Israel being accused of genocide because of the large number of civilian casualties in Gaza and pro-Hamas demonstrations unleashing a wave of anti-Semitism on US campuses and elsewhere. And Hamas itself, of course, has been accused of genocide because its actions on October 7th were a pre-enactment of the vision in its charter, which looks at the elimination of Israel and killing Jews at the same time. So this word is now in the news, and last week, when you had the controversy surrounding the congressional testimony of the presidents of 3 elite universities who showed an absolute indifference to the problem of genocide. This led the Wall Street Journal, the normally circumspect Wall Street Journal, to publish an article last weekend saying that the term genocide should no longer be used because it's a source of disagreement. You should take a look at the article. It's a source. It's a contested word, and therefore we shouldn't use it anymore. This was the lead article in the review section of the Journal on Saturday. This recommendation, of course, is exceedingly foolish, since genocide is precisely defined in the Genocide Convention, which was the UN's first human rights treaty that has been ratified by 152 countries. And rather than give up the term, because some people carelessly and often mendaciously abuse it for political purposes, the challenge is to use the convention to build a campaign of moral and political support for peoples in the world who are today authentic victims of genocide as defined by international law. This is what the Uyghurs and their allies are doing, and it's why we're here today. And I believe that our efforts, your efforts, can inspire other besieged peoples, and here I'm thinking of the Tibetans and the Rohingya, to strengthen their own efforts against genocidal oppression. The term genocide is still a relatively new word that was coined in 1944 by the Polish-Jewish jurist Raphael Lemkin in his monumental study, Axis Rule in Occupied Europe. While Lemkin himself lost 49 members of his family in the Nazi Holocaust, and then led the effort to draft and adopt the Genocide Convention, the definition of genocide in the Convention is not based on the precedent of the Holocaust, which Lemkin called the immediate destruction of a nation, nor is it identical with Lemkin's own view of genocide, which included, in addition to destroying a group physically, also an effort to systematically erode a group's culture, language, national feelings, religion, and economic existence. Such actions were genocidal in Lemkin's view if they were part of what he called a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of the group. Lemkin, in other words, wanted cultural genocide to be recognized in the convention, but he didn't have the support for that idea on the convention's drafting committee, and he wrote in his autobiography that it was with a heavy heart that he decided not to press the issue. The definition of genocide that was ultimately contained in the Genocide Convention focused on actions taken with the intent to bring about the physical destruction of a group, in whole or in part. Two of the actions designated as genocidal in the convention are being committed today by the Chinese regime against the Uyghurs, and these are measures intended to prevent births within the group that we've heard about, and I'm going to thank Adrian for his critical research on that, and in particular, forced sterilization and abortion, and also forcibly transferring children of the group to another group, involving the forcible placement of Uyghur children in state orphanages where they are cut off from their families and relentlessly indoctrinated with regime propaganda to, and this is a quote from a Chinese official that was in the New York Times, to break their lineage, break their roots, break their connections, and break their origins. While these acts qualify as genocide under the convention, they in fact only scratch the surface of the genocidal nation-destroying actions that the Beijing regime is systematically committing against the Uyghur people. As a new board member of the Uyghur Human Rights Project, I've just gone through the 75 to 100 reports that they've done. And reports and other documents which are on the organization's website, and they tell a horrific story of the cultural, religious, linguistic, economic, and national genocide, including the criminalization of religious practice, the destruction of many thousands of mosques, cemeteries, and national shrines, the imprisonment and disappearance of intellectual and cultural elites, the comprehensive and relentless government surveillance, the demolition of the old city of Kashgar that Omer called the living heart of our culture, and the brainwashing of prisoners in re-education camps, along with constant beatings, torture, and rape, with a former prisoner telling UHRP about the sounds he remembered hearing in the camps of people sobbing, dogs barking, guards shouting, and every night prisoners sobbing. These reports constitute a veritable Holocaust memorial museum of loss, destruction, and genocide. Regarding the path forward for accountability and deterrence, I have two recommendations that I'd like to make. The first is to use Article 2C of the Genocide Convention to press for recognition as genocide of the many acts I have just described that constitute, as Lenkin said, a coordinated plan aiming at the extinction and destruction of the Uyghur people. The article describes as genocide actions, and this is a quote, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. I believe that the cultural, religious, and economic actions I have described, taken together, inflict conditions of life that make it impossible for the Uyghur people to survive as Uyghurs, and therefore it constitutes genocide. My second recommendation is that the Uyghur movement might consider issuing a statement on the Israel-Gaza crisis and the rising tide of anti-Semitism. Such a statement could reject the canard that Israel is committing genocide, since it is made clear that its target is not Palestinians, but Hamas, the terrorist organization, which callously uses civilians as human shields. It could also express the hope that this terrible conflict will lead to a peaceful resolution of the conflict between Israel and Palestine that will satisfy Israel's need for security and the Palestinians' aspiration for dignity and sovereignty. Not least, such a statement could build on the growing friendship between Uyghurs and Jewish organizations and religious institutions that are devoted to supporting the Uyghur struggle against genocide. I see Karen Gilberman there, who organizes every month from Honest Israel Congregation a demonstration in front of the Chinese embassy protesting against Uyghur genocide. It would be a bold action, I believe, were our Uyghur friends to do this, and I think it would attract great attention and significantly benefit the Uyghur struggle for survival and hope for a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl, for bringing us that historical and comparative perspective and powerful words of inspiration. I will mention that the Congressional agenda does include, as Omer mentioned, quite a few bills with the word Uyghur in them. And these can all be found for those interested in joining that movement to urge passage on the UHRP website, uhrp.org/bill-tracker. And we invite you to take a look at that part of the agenda, in addition to the many other suggestions we received from speakers. And I will say that we are joined now by another survivor of those very concentration camps, who bravely was the first person to give testimony in this Congress before the Congressional Executive Commission on China. I thank the additional other staff who've also been able to join us. So let's thank Mr. Tursun for giving the testimony. Thank you, and now we've come to nearly the end of our formal program. We hope that media and others will be able to speak with our people who have presented today, as well as others who are here. So we will now turn to co-organizer, the president of the Uyghur American Association, to give us closing remarks today.
Hello everyone. It's almost 6, everyone's hungry. I see food in the back, so I'll be quick. We're still in the midst of an ongoing genocide. Our community has lost so much in terms of erasure of lives, well-being, and dignity that it is impossible to reverse. Innocent Uyghurs continue to languish in prisons and forced labor camps, while the world continues to make business deals with the Chinese government. We cannot communicate with our loved ones while the world continues its efforts to make concessions to the CCP leadership to maintain communication. Sometimes we feel unseen and unheard as we try to also deal with Beijing's long-arm and transnational aggressions on US soil. So we want to implore to those who are listening to us to rise above your fear of China's potential retaliation or desire to make more money, and help us by recognizing the Uyghur genocide and take urgent action to end the suffering of the Uyghur people. At the very least, we can relieve ourselves from complicity in China's concentration camps and political prisons by refusing to purchase products made by Uyghur forced labor and the Chinese technology used in its Orwellian police state. We are watching the world awaken to the threats posed by dictators like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. But action is often late and timid. Today's atrocities should not be archived for future generations to study and ask the same questions they did about Hitler. How could this have happened? The tribunal's judgment occurs with the determination issued by many governments and parliaments, including our own. When will we, I want to leave you with this question. When will we hold the Chinese government accountable for its genocide against Uyghurs? Thank you.
Today we're left with some solemn obligations, questions for reflection in the heart as well as the head, and an action agenda going forward. So we invite everyone here to join us for a reception to enjoy Uyghur cuisine. That is part of the way that Uyghurs can preserve the dignity of their people by celebrating their culture and their nation. So thank you all so much for attending.